Another example that's given is a nail. If I'm building a fence and I nail a big old 6-inch nail through a board, and then I decide that it shouldn't go there, I really meant to put that nail somewhere else, well, then I need to pry that nail out and put it somewhere else. But what remains in the board? A hole. So that whole idea of restitution is filling in that hole. So, and if you don't do it in your life, you have a chance after you pass on from this plane to spend some time in the waiting room. Physical death and suffering were not plan A. God did not create us to suffer. God created us for what? To love him, to be his companions, to walk with him in the cool of the night in the garden, if you remember the language from Genesis, right? What happened? What did Adam and Eve do? What did our first parents do? They messed up, didn't they? They basically committed that first grievous sin, which is they substituted their judgment for God's. They said, God, it's a good idea, but I think we're just going to go with what we think is best. Anybody recognize that? Isn't that in a way, when we say that pride is one of the roots of evil? Well, that's pride, because we assume that we know better than the almighty, everlasting, loving, merciful God who created us for himself. I'm thinking it probably applies to all of us. But after death, they undergo purification so as to achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven. This teaching is also, this is the next section, 1032. This teaching is also based on the practice of prayer for the dead, and then it quotes, of course, the section from Maccabees. From the beginning, the church has honored the memory of the dead and offered prayers in suffrage for them. Above all, the Eucharistic sacrifice, so that thus purified they may attain the beatific vision of God. The church also commends almsgiving, indulgences, and works of penance undertaken on behalf of the dead. Catechism 1031. The church gives the name purgatory to this final purification of the elect. You have to be elect before you can be purified in purgatory, which is entirely different from the punishment of the damned. The church formulated her doctrine of faith on purgatory, especially at the councils, and then it tells you Florence and Trent. As for certain lesser faults, we must believe that before the final judgment, there is a purifying fire. And I'm going to give you a distinction between the particular judgment and the final judgment, right? So we can ask them for their intercession. They are capable of praying for us, but they're incapable of changing their situation in any way, right? So that they are in this state of purification, but they're burning with love as well. Okay, so there are people who would say, well, let's concentrate on exactly how they're suffering. I say, you know what? Let's leave that to the Lord. Let's trust him to give us exactly what we need to be purified in the shortest amount of time. Of course, there's no time. You do understand we're talking about a situation which is outside the space-time continuum. Why? Because God is pure spirit, and he too operates with all the spirits outside the space-time continuum. So we can't talk about days, and we can't talk about places or months or years, right? And I'll be talking about that as well, because I'm sure the old-fashioned way of talking about indulgences, which is what I'm going to be talking about on the next section, speaks about, you go to a church, you get 4 months, 2 days, and 3 hours off off your time in purgatory. You're going, wait a minute, how does that work, So let's not worry about that. Let's not worry about it. Let's trust the Lord to give us what we need. Let's do the best we can. Let's live in holiness while we're here, while we have a chance to affect what happens. Because we have been created for the Lord, and we will go back to him because that is what we want. That is ultimately all the planes, the trains, the automobiles, the degrees, the children, the relationships, the careers, the wealth, the power, all the things that we seek that we think are going to make us happy are just pallid, pale substitutes for the real pearl of great price. We have been created to fit with the Lord intimately. We have this vacuum, St. Augustine says. And only it's a God-shaped hole, and only God will fit there. And we keep trying to cram all these various things in there that are not fitting. And we wonder, hey, so-and-so had $1 gazillion, and yet he just overdosed, or she just did this, or they're on their 15th marriage, or, And you see all these people who should have everything, right? But if you don't have the main thing, you don't have anything. So that is that is kind of how we should approach it, okay? We shouldn't, I mean, you know, I'm here trying to give you specifics and chapters and verses and all that stuff, but in the end, it has to proceed from a relationship with the Lord that is a personal one and that trusts him to do what is best for us, right?